Hello, my name is Kayla Denker. I am a former archaeologist with the U.S. Forest Service. Um, yeah, that's really all I know how to say.
All right. Well, welcome everyone to another episode of Working People, a podcast about the lives, jobs, dreams, and struggles of the working class today. Brought to you in partnership with In These Times magazine and the Real News Network, produced by Jules Taylor, and made possible by the support of listeners like you. So, as y'all heard, we are joined today by Kayla, and it really is great to connect with you, Kayla. Although, I genuinely wish that we were connecting under less horrifying circumstances, because I know that you have been just dealing with a whole mess of shit over there, and we're going to talk about all of that. But as the message of this show, as we say every single week, right? I mean, there's so much more to all of us, right, than just our job titles and name tags and stuff. We're all whole human beings with lives and backstories and wants and needs and pains and joys, and it's important for all of us as fellow workers to listen to one another's stories and get to know our fellow workers in order to better stand in solidarity with one another. And that's what I want to start with this episode here. Right? We're going to talk about the awful shit. We're going to talk about how you're doing. We're going to talk about what people can do to support you and our fellow trans workers and neighbors, friends, family members who are quite literally under fucking attack in this goddamn country. But I want to start by just getting to know a little more about you. So, whereabouts in the country are you? Where'd you grow up?
Well, I'm originally from Fort Peck, Montana, which is a tiny little town in the northeastern corner of the state. I think it's got a population of like 1,000. It's pretty small. We moved around a lot though, because my dad worked for the government, and so but I still mostly spent my time in Montana. I moved down to Colorado in October for to work this job for the Forest Service. But I lived most of the last 20 years in Helena, Montana. That's where I graduated high school and everything, bought my first house, all of that.
Wow. Okay, so I got to ask, because I grew up in Southern California. So basically the polar opposite of Montana.
Pretty much, yeah.
So I'm so fascinated by people who grew up in just vastly different settings than I did. What did you get up to growing up there in Montana?
Well, it's a kind of a different world when you grow up in a really small town in a very remote place like that, because I never really had a concept of what the outside world was like. There was only two radio stations, an oldie station and a country station. So I wasn't exposed to a wide variety of music types until I was much older. It was one of those towns that like boomers reminisce about, where everybody knows each other. The kids just run around all over town and nobody worries about them. Nobody locks their doors and all of that. Very stereotypical. It did have very harsh winters. It was like living in the tundra. And the wind never stopped. It was constant, and sometimes it was so powerful that as a kid I could lean into the wind and it would hold me up. So that was always fun. But in the wintertime,
that's going to be a big
lethal.
note for me.
Yeah, it was different. In the wintertime, it was very lethal. We would have to cover every bit of our skin. And then since we couldn't really cover a lot of our, like around our eyes, we would take Crisco and rub them and put it like around our eyes so it wouldn't frostbite when we go outside. Because you can't just stay inside all the time for all winter, or else you'll go nuts. And but like it was all I knew. I didn't know how weird that was till I moved away. For me, the biggest city that we ever saw was Glasgow, which is just another small town. It was just slightly bigger than Fort Peck. So when I finally left the state for the first time and saw Seattle, it absolutely blew my mind. I couldn't even before that I couldn't even imagine something like that. It was wild.
Yeah, God, I bet. That must be a culture shock. And
Mhm.
like as much of a culture shock as it would have been dropping my ass in the middle of frigid Montana, putting Crisco around my eyes. I mean, like, and you mentioned something, right? Like that, you can't stay inside the whole goddamn time. So
No,
like,
it's yeah,
well, I was
you
gonna
get
ask, like,
cabin
what
fever.
did you guys do?
As I mean, I was a really young kid, so like normal stuff that kids do. We would ride our bikes around town. In the wintertime, we would go play in the snow because it's so cold there, or at least it was, that it would just blow around like sand because it would never get cold enough to really clump together. And so there would be snow dunes all around town, and we would dig tunnels through them and everything. It was fun. Um, in the summertime, we mostly just rode our bikes around, and yeah, I don't remember a whole lot from back then, but I do remember that. That's what I remember the most.
Well, I always keep like a little like notepad and pen to kind of jot stuff down because that I don't want to forget because I'm like a dog like when with cars pass I'm like, oh, I want to ask about that or I want to hear more about that, and I just wrote on this little notepad snow dunes 3 question
Yeah,
marks.
that's literally what they are. It's just like sand dunes, but it's snow instead because it's so cold. The little snow crystals, they don't stick to each other, so they're just like sand.
Wow, that's wild. And
Mhm.
I mean you also kind of like just mentioned something that really kind of caught my eye that sounds like you're saying that that's not the case much anymore.
Uh, from what I understand, I haven't been back too much, but yeah, global warming has taken away those winters. Now they're like everywhere else, really, just fairly stereotypical winters. All of Montana is like that. It used to have much harsher winters, and now they're pretty standard, like the winters in, say, um, well, down here in Colorado, it's about the same. They're not. I won't say they're mild, but they're not that harsh. There's no more snow dunes.
Yeah, I mean Jesus, like I'm from Southern California, so all of this is terrible to me. But like but like I lived in Chicago, I lived in Michigan, so like I've experienced some cold. I feel like I've
Mm.
earned my street cred. But
But I
like,
will say that the humid cold like that is more harsh. Like as long as you have a really big heavy coat on up there, even though it's like 40 below zero Fahrenheit, um, it's more tolerable than I was ever able to. Because I spent some time in Virginia, and even though it never got that cold there, with the humidity, it felt colder. But
mm,
I mean, maybe that's just because I wasn't used to it. I don't know.
yeah, man, when I moved to Chicago, those Midwesterners, they could pick out a California boy a mile away because they were just laugh at me. They were like, "Oh man, just wait till January comes," and they were right. I was not prepared, but like, I feel like, and what I tell people now, is, including my family, who never tire of sending me pictures of them barbecuing in January and February in Orange County, like that joke never gets old to them, but. Like what I tell them is like you never get used to it. You just learn how to deal with it
Yeah,
better.
that's really all it is.
Yeah. And so from moving from Michigan to Baltimore, I expected it to be milder here, but it's been, I don't know, very jarring. I mean, I think
Mhm.
all winter here, we maybe got snow twice and like it didn't even really stick on the ground. That's not normal. And
Right.
someone had said something, I don't know, maybe it was just one of those lines you see on social media that sticks with you that's like, this is the coldest winter you're ever gonna experience again, right? I mean, like
I
it's
have not heard it that I always hear the reverse that like this is the coolest summer that you're gonna ever experience again. But yeah, that's a good way of putting it too.
Yeah. I don't know. I don't mean to kind of go down we got enough despair to talk about here. I don't mean to drive us down the avenue of climate despair, but just thinking about, it's been on my mind because it's like unseasonably hot right now in Baltimore. It's like it went from kind of unpleasantly chilly to just summer all of a sudden. So it's just been on my mind a lot. But let me ask you this. So a little birdie, i.e. you, told me that you're an archaeology nerd.
I am, yes, a very big one.
Okay, so like, did that start at an early age? Because I feel like if you're running around Montana, like you could like get into some pretty cool, like, you know, Indiana Jones type shit.
Funnily enough, even though it's not really what inspired me to become an archaeologist, Indiana Jones movies were my favorite movies as a kid. I watched them just over and over and over and over again. But yeah, it was actually when I probably when I was in high school, because we had moved over to Virginia, and there was a lot more. There's not more history there, but it's more tangible, I guess. Like there's older buildings and there's battlefields all over the place. And so that got me interested in history. But what I really liked was when we went to all these battlefields, and there's objects there that you can see. It's impacts from the battle there, and that you can go and you can touch it, and you can interact with it. And a lot of the times you would find like musket balls and stuff, but they're in the field everywhere.
Wow.
And the thing that really grabbed me was when I would find something like that, I would pick it up and I would know that that the last person to touch it was the person that dropped it there, however many hundreds of years ago. For some objects, the objects I deal with now, many thousands of years ago. So I would have this direct connection with that person from the past. And I just always have loved that about archaeology. So basically, from the time I was in high school, I had a passion for it. And I didn't pursue it at first, unfortunately, due to familial pressure. There was I'm obviously a trans woman, and so I was raised to be a boy. And in my family, all of the men joined the military. It was a tradition. And so I was kind of pressured to do that from a very early age. And so I went that direction at first. But after a few years in, I realized that I really didn't want to do that. And so I got out and I pursued an archaeology degree and never looked back. But yeah, if I had been smart, I would have pursued it right out of high school instead of just maintaining it as a hobby at the time.
Well, that family pressure is no joke, though. I mean, I remember talking to a Trader Joe's worker back home in California, Alex P. And, Alex's parents, if I recall correctly, they were Vietnamese refugees, and like my parents, they were very conservative. And I come from, I'm a first generation Mexican American. And, I will say for my parents, I have to give them a lot of credit for this, even though I was raised very conservative. Like, they did, push us to sort of follow what we wanted. They were very strict in every other regard. But if I was like, I want to be a doctor, they were like, sure, go for it. And then years later, when I was in college, and I was like, hey, I suck at being a doctor. What if I major in Slavic languages and literatures? Would you guys disown me? To their credit, they were like, yeah, that's fine. Do what makes you happy. I think they kind of knew, like I was always like you being an archaeology nerd. I was always a literature nerd. And so it wasn't that much of a surprise to them. But we also, as a first gen family, like we didn't know that, like to them, it was like, oh, well, he could be a professor. Like that's a good job too. None of us knew how fucked, higher education is and how no one gets a job as a tenured professor anymore. So that was our mistake. But like, I will say that for them. But I remember talking to Alex about this and the sort of that overbearing pressure from your parents, and just how I think the longer we go into adulthood, we can almost start to forget just how big of a role that shit played in the first 15 to 18 years of our lives. So that must have been that must have been a lot when you have this kind of family lineage weighing on you
Mhm.
to go into the military.
Especially since I was the only male child. So there was a lot of pressure put on me to go carry on those traditions, to pass on the family name and all of that. And yeah, I didn't even realize um, the how damaging that was to me until I was much older, until I was probably in my mid-20s, when I was finally able to sort of break out of that and accept myself and start to basically to become myself. I was that whoever they wanted me to be before then, just purely because of that pressure, and I didn't even realize it.
Man, yeah, that's heartbreaking. I mean, don't get me wrong. I'm glad that, because some people, I don't know, some people go their whole lives without ever coming to that revelation or ever being able to follow it through. And I think that's one of the things that, just really breaks my heart when I think about all the people, not just in our generation, but in past generations who have had to live lives they didn't want because of those outside pressures, right? Whether it was because they were gay, whether it was because they wanted to, be an artist or, I don't know, any type of profession that just was different from what their parents or society or what have you was pushing them to be. Like, that's a really, really kind of sad constant, I think, in our society, right? Is just not trusting people to, I don't know, pursue who they want to be who they want to be, embrace who they are and what they want and what they're passionate about. And I guess like Alex P and I kind of discuss, like, maybe in our kinder moments, we could say our parents had the best of intentions just because they wanted us to succeed. They knew how unfair the world is, but that's not always the case. I think there is there's a will to dominate that just destroys so many people's lives. But
Sorry, go ahead.
No, please.
I was just to say that you really, really see that as a trans person with unsupportive parents, because here's this thing that you realize about yourself, and that when you start to transition, and it brings you just so much joy for oftentimes, especially in my case, the first time in your adult life, and then your parents disapprove of it. And that's just always been so poignant with me, because I mean, they're disapproving of your joy because it's not what they wanted. And that is just such a heavy amount of pressure, and such an anti-parental thing to do, I guess. I don't know other way to put it. Because like all a parent should ever want is for their child to be happy and healthy, and that's it. And when we finally are able to do that, to experience that kind of rejection from it is one of the most the most jarring examples of that fact, of those kind of social pressures, I think.
Yeah, no, I think that's really powerfully put. And it's like, Jesus, I mean, look around us right now. I mean, we can kind of circle back to this later when we get to kind of how the kind of the hatred and fear that is just being stoked left and right now, like taking, like you said, that thing that you've experienced, and that so many kids who are just trying to kind of like embrace themselves have experienced, like taking that and blowing it up to a societal level, to the point that we are creating this atmosphere of hate and resentment that makes it seem like, I don't know, being trans is the worst fucking thing that imaginable that a parent could experience. And so when you do that, you do what our society has done in the past, when we said, it was the worst thing in the world for, your kids to be gay. It was the worst thing in the world for your kid to be left-handed or have a disability. I don't know. It's just like, that this is, I hate to say it's like a perennial feature of our fucking society, but it sort of feels that way. But like, it's like we never learned the lesson that the more that you expand that and you create those cultures of hostility, you just create pain. You just create a hell for the very people that you claim to love and that you claim you're trying to guide back towards the light. But what you're really doing is just killing them.
Yeah, that's a really good point, that it's all kind of the same sentiment. Especially, for queer people, like gay people, but it's also, left-handedness. So things that we think are silly now were very serious back then, and parents were absolutely devastated to learn that their child was left-handed, as weird as that is. And it's all that is social pressure. So the society puts pressure on the parent to be disappointed about some aspect of their child that the child is happy about, that brings them joy, and so then they put pressure on that child. It's a vicious cycle.
It is, and I'm just really sorry that you've gone through that. And I wanted to kind of ask, when you were still, kind of in that sort of pressure cooker. And kind of in the closet, like being pushed to the military, right? And all the kind of complicated feelings that come with that. Like around what time was that?
It was actually around the same time that I was radicalized, economically speaking, and started to reject the concepts of capitalism. It all very much. They're really interconnected. The societal pressures that make us think that we have to be straight and cisgendered are all very related to the economic pressures that make us support capitalism. And so I was deployed. I was in Afghanistan, and I got to see the United States imperial presence in all of its naked glory over there, where it doesn't even bother to maintain the facade of truth and justice and liberty and all of that it does back home. It doesn't care. It doesn't care that the Afghans and everyone else overseas recognizes that we're the villains of that story, because they're just so powerful that they can just grind them into dust and that their opinions don't matter. So I saw all of that, and I was forced to confront the fact that I had devoted my life up till that point towards serving that system that represented everything that I resented. I thought I was the good guy until that point, and it really caused me to question everything that I had been taught and led to believe was true, not just about society but about myself. And also, there had always been clues. I was never masculine enough, and I always had people all throughout my life asking me if I was gay, and one of the people I was deployed with straight up asked me once if I was actually trans. It was very weird. And I was vaguely familiar with the concept at that time because I had been raised deeply conservative and isolated from all of those concepts. So I didn't really understand the question at the time, but it made me look more into it. And the more I looked into it, the more I realized that, yes, I am trans. So it was just a very transformative period for me, that deployment. I hate that it took a deployment for me to realize that, but it did.
Yeah, that's a hell of multiple revelations to experience at once. Jesus.
Yeah.
I mean, And we definitely don't have to talk about it if you don't want to, but like as someone who also grew up very conservative,
Mhm.
I was wondering like how those dots started connecting for you, like, and kind of like, because for me, I think a lot of it was the financial crash in
Mhm.
2008, right? I mean, in many ways, as I've explained on this show, that's where the show came out of, and where
Mm.
the work that I do now came out of, right? We lost everything in the recession. We lost the house I grew up in. My mom and dad, were just so depressed, and they weren't talking about it. And, I know especially for my dad, it was like there was so much wrapped up in, him coming to the United States. I mean, he grew up dirt poor in Tijuana. Never really knew his dad. His mom died when he was 6. Like, he was separated from his siblings at age 8. I mean, he had a tough life. And so becoming a citizen, meeting my mom, building a family, and owning a home, like, there was so much of that American dream wrapped up in that when it all went away, I don't know if that's something you ever fully recover from, but I knew
No.
in the years like afterwards, because it didn't all happen at once. It was like a slow burn for like
Mhm.
4 or 5 years.
Yeah.
I could just see how depressed he was and how depressed my mom was, and then I was depressed. I mean, I graduated from college. I thought I had done everything right. I went to the best college I could. Granted, I majored in Russian literature, but I was like, that's got to be worth something. But it wasn't worth shit. And so I was a temp working in warehouses and factories. Like, none of us knew what we were going to do. And so the first person I ever interviewed on this show, 5, 6 years ago, was my dad, because I was trying to get him to talk about that stuff. And we ended up kind of talking a lot together about how our own ideologies kind of changed through the recession, how we had kind of, in the same way that as Catholics, we were kind of taught to believe that, like, the cosmos, God's design, like, was perfect, but it was filled by imperfect people, fallible people,
Mhm.
people who make mistakes, people who sin, people who need to take it upon themselves to be better. But the system itself was fundamentally good. Like, that's how I also
Mhm.
viewed, like, I don't know, capitalism or society, right? The structure, the bones were good. The structure was good. There was just a couple of bad actors or people
Yeah.
not working hard enough. The recession really blew that up for me, because I saw how many hardworking people who had, quote unquote, done everything right, including my family, including the people I worked with in those warehouses, and also the people who didn't do, quote unquote, everything right, but who had had the deck stacked against them from birth, pretty much. I just saw how we all ended up in the same place and how rigged the game was. All the while I'm watching on TV how, like, the government's bailing out the banks and letting them do the same shit that caused the recession in the first place, while families like ours floundered. So it took something that severe for that ideological hold to break for me to finally realize, oh shit, maybe this system actually is rigged. So I wanted to ask, like, what that sort of process was like for you.
Well, I think I mean, the moment obviously was deployment, and it had a similar effect on me, that it just kind of crashed everything down. But I never had a strong foundation for any of that to begin with, because like, it's always difficult to vocalize this, but I was able to accept myself as trans at that time, but I'd always known it, even though I didn't have the language for it before then. Um, the only thing I really realized once I was given that language and I started looking into it was that my situation is not unique. That there's lots of people like me, and that transition is an option. I'd always known since I was a child, a very young child, I'd experienced gender dysphoria, and but I didn't know that's what it was, and so I basically was raised to think that things like that were just sin. But there, in the back of your mind, you always know that, how can it be sinful when I've always been this way? I was born this way. Like, why would it be pre-programmed with these sinful state of being? But being raised in a deeply conservative environment, I was basically taught to suppress that and to bury it deep down. But that still made sure that structure of dissonance from reality was never very sound. And so when I deployed and I finally could no longer deny it, I couldn't just keep pushing those thoughts aside. It just all crumbled. But it was definitely a bit more. That was the moment, but it was a sort of a slow process. Definitely 2008 had an impact. But it and so I deployed in 2012, so it wasn't that much later from the crash. So it's all kind of, those events kind of blended together for me. But while I was there, I had kind of the same realization you did, that I would look around and see all of these people that are working enormously hard, the local Afghan people, and they're not doing anything wrong. They're just regular people struggling to survive in absolutely insurmountable conditions, and they're still being ground into pulp for no reason whatsoever. And there was no good justification for it. They weren't morally in the wrong, and yet they were being made to suffer because of this system. And that kind of broke me. There was actually a moment. I can trace it back to a specific moment, and it was at the end of a day. We rode in this little like crappy bus between where we worked. I was an aircraft mechanic, and so we had to work at the airfield, and we'd ride this little bus along the fence line of the fob between there and our barracks. And so we were going back along that at the end of the day, and there was this specific section that was on the other side of the fence was an old Russian minefield. And this at this point, we'd been in Afghanistan for 10 years, and this minefield was still there. The U.S. had all of the equipment, all of the personnel to remove it. But what they did instead, because it was cheaper, was to just pay the local Afghans a fee for every mine that they brought us. And
Jesus.
they don't have any training, they don't have any tools, and they're desperate for money to survive. And so they were injured and killed from it all the time. And so we were driving past this section, and I look out into that minefield, and there was a little girl. She couldn't have been older than maybe 8 or 9, maybe a little younger. And she was just standing there staring at us, and she was covered head to toe in mud and what looked like gore. She didn't look injured, so the best I can guess is it was from someone else. And she was just staring at us. And I don't know why or what she was doing, but she raised an arm. She wasn't waving, she just raised it as we passed by and just watched us. And I could see her eyes from that bus. And that hit me hard because they were just dead. Like her body was perfectly alive, but her soul was dead. And there's no justification for that. Like doing that to a child because you don't want to spend the money to prevent something like that is just evil. And the system that does that is evil. And I couldn't deny that anymore. And so that's the moment where it all kind of broke.
Jesus, I'm like, frankly, choking back tears thinking of that because
I get choked up a bit every time I recall it, which is pretty much every day.
God, I can only imagine what it's like to live with that for you, for her, for everyone involved like this. I mean, first of all, thank you for sharing. And I know that isn't easy. And like, I don't know. I think this is one of the reasons that, you know, for all the times that we may disagree or talk shit to one another, like I'm grateful I get to work with someone like Chris Hedges, because we talk about this a lot when we're in the studio, just kind of like during downtime. And, you know, what Chris says over and over again, and he's very blunt about it. He's like, there's no such thing as a good war. There is
not.
War is only death. That's it.
Yep.
And if you haven't seen it, then, you know, that's how, you know, so many of us are kept in the dark. That's how we're able to have our minds warped by bullshit Hollywood versions of what war looks like, and these kind of like, you know, kindergarten fairy tales of morality where things are so black and white, and they're such clear-cut good guys and bad guys, and you have politicians who, with a straight face, who can drum up the fervor of war and send, you know, children off, as they've been doing since time immemorial, right? This was like Eugene Debs' great speech, right? Even in the feudal times, it was the Lord sending the serfs out to fight for them. They weren't fucking fighting for themselves. Like, this is... working people have always been just grist for the mill in the death machine of class war and jockeying for domination and position. And there's no way to put a positive spin on that. And I think just hearing you talk about that, like, I don't know, maybe it's like I maybe realized more than I have ever before just how right Chris is when he says that. And
I've always, I shouldn't say always, since I deployed, I've always stressed that war is not hell. It's a bad term, because hell is where bad people go to be punished in mythology, and that's not who's getting punished at war. And I know it's I said it before. I knew that it was a MASH skit, but he said it perfectly in that. And it's something I realized while I was there, before I knew about that skit, that it's good people. It's people that don't deserve it. Those are the people that get harmed and killed in war. And so that's not hell. Nobody deserves the fate that they get at war. At least not the people that are caught in between. Certainly plenty of us on our side, we deserved it, but we weren't the ones that were getting hurt the most. It was mostly the local people that did nothing, that just got caught in between.
And I just, like, I keep coming back to, like, what a heavy, complicated time to be you, right? Amidst all that. And as you're talking about, like, coming to that revelation, seeing, you know, just the true inhumanity of war itself, but also like the U.S. like imperialist led like form of that in a place like Afghanistan, but at the same time like finally kind of coming to fully understand and embrace yourself, like, and then leaving and coming back home. Like, so I know this is going to feel like a real sharp left turn, but I don't want to just make you talk about awful stuff the whole time. And I do want to make space for what you said before, where, you know, like, there's joy in this story too, right? Both in terms of you finally being able to embrace yourself, but also getting to embrace your nerdiness for archaeology when you came back. So like,
right.
So I guess tell me a little bit about that. Like when you came back and how you like, you've got all of this weight on you. You've got all this stuff happening at once. Like what then?
It was, there was still quite a bit of all of that leftover, pressure from where I was being raised. Like I didn't just throw it all off at once because I was scared. I mean, that's all a very big change. So I was still in the closet for another 10 years, but I did immediately pursue archaeology. I actually started while I was in Afghanistan in a sort of informal way. I wasn't taking any classes, but I started buying archaeology books and started reading up on it to decide that that is what I wanted to do. Um, so I really settled on it while I was there, and yeah, pretty much immediately I got back and signed up for classes at the University of Montana, and went there in the fall. And I immediately fell in love with it. That school has a fantastic archaeology program. It has some of the best instructors in the world. In fact, there's my lithics teacher, who, strangely enough, I didn't know that she was a trans woman until last year. But her name's Anna Prentice, and she was actually not there for most of that semester because she had been invited to speak at Cambridge University in England. So that's how big of a name she was.
Wow.
So it was, yeah, this little tiny school in the middle of Montana had some very prestigious instructors, but yeah, it just kept driving home that initial love that I developed when I was in high school, and just ever since, I've always been pursuing that moment of finding artifacts and establishing those connections with people from the past. I got my degree. I started getting into work. I mostly pursued. I tried to get some private sector jobs, but for some reason, right out of school, I was having trouble, so I had to do seasonal work with the Forest Service and the BLM. My very first archaeology job was for the Forest Service in Helena, and on one of the first surveys that we would do, or that I did, I found a projectile point that was at least 8,000 years old. And so that really sunk it in. If there were any doubts in me before then, they would have vanished in that moment when I picked up this thing. And I knew that the last person to touch it was 8,000 years ago. That was very cool to me.
Wow. Yeah, I got chills thinking about that.
Right. My field school that I went to was actually under Dr. Lauren Davis at Coopers Ferry, Idaho, and that one had artifacts that were much older. I didn't actually find any of them, but I did find a Great Basin point, which was the first one that they'd found at that site, which established trade relations between those two areas. So that was pretty cool. But one of my favorite moments was in actually 2021 when I was working for the BLM out in Oregon. And it was the end of the day, and we were all tired. It was pouring rain. We were just walking back to the truck, and I was sort of dragging my feet and kind of kicking the mud because we hadn't really done much. We hadn't found anything. And I just kicked this clod of dirt, and out tumbles what's called a Western stem point. And it's completely perfect. They look like little Christmas trees. They're like a stereotypical looking arrowhead, except they weren't arrowheads. And it was completely perfect. There were no chips. There was nothing. It was like had just been made and someone set it there. And that is at least 13,500 years old.
Wow.
And here I am holding this thing that is in pristine condition. And it was the last person to touch it was 13,500 years ago. And that was the coolest moment for me. And that it also, though, I did the significance of me as a white person finding that was never lost on me. And I've tried to always become more and more of an advocate for bringing more indigenous people into archaeology, because here I am holding this artifact that is of such significant importance to the native people of the Pacific Northwest that, but I'm a white person. Like it's kind of colonizing, and I never lost sight of that fact. Um, but I do appreciate that I can help their story to try and make amends for that, because like something that I've been proud to contribute a little bit to is the fact that um, the native people have stories that have always said that they were here far longer ago than what archaeologists have been saying for a long time. Like the Cree up in Canada, they have genealogies that go back almost 20,000 years. And for a very long time, archaeologists and historians dismiss that as just, oh, it's oral histories. It's not trustworthy. But then, what was it, last year, maybe the year before, they found those footprints down in New Mexico that are 23,000 years old, verifying that they really were here that long ago. And the work that I've done has helped in a very small way to push that further back too, because I've done a lot of work in what we call pre-Clovis archaeology, which is what that Western stem point is a part of. Before, until very recently, until like the 90s and 2000s, it was believed that the first human beings arrived in North America about 12,000 years ago. Nobody was here or older, further back than that. And that was one reason one justification they used to dismiss all of the native people's histories. And now we've been able to find, and I've helped find all these artifacts and sites that keep pushing it further and further and further back, like that Western stem point that's 1,500 years older than what the archaeologists that taught me claimed about when humans first got here. And so I kind of feel like I'm helping to contribute to decolonizing the story of the native people in this country. And that's something that I'm very proud of.
Yeah, I mean, hell yeah, that's incredible. And I can only imagine what it's like to hold something like that in your hand, and to have that realization, like you said, it's like, wow, the last person to hold this was thousands and thousands of years ago. That's one of those, like, I don't know, puts things into perspective moments. And, like I wanted to kind of like, and I could genuinely talk to you for days, but I don't want to take up too much of your night. So like, I promise I won't meander us down like too long of a detour, but it just makes me think
I will very much indulge in that. I can talk forever about archaeology.
Well, it kind of makes me, there's a parallel there, right? To what we were just talking about with your experience in Afghanistan, right? I mean, obviously two very different settings, but like in both cases, like there is a sort of experience deprogramming ideology. Right.
Yes.
And
especially like, someone who's raised conservative to think that the earth is like 6,000 years old.
Yeah. So that's what I want. That's why I wanted to ask, because I was like, how did that experience as an archaeologist, like, do that same work as well? Like what were you learning and having to sort of like upgrade your like conceptions of the world and of the country that you're in through doing this work?
I had by then I had already abandoned like any Christian beliefs that I still maintained. I'd actually moved past that towards the end of high school. I had really started being very what's the word I'm looking for? Disillusioned with those religious notions. I was still pretty conservative in a lot of other aspects, but religion-wise, that had pretty much vanished by then. So there was no major revelation when I started my archaeology studies about that kind of stuff. But it still was always something that I was forced to confront anytime I talk to my parents about what I did for a living, because they are still very much strongly these conservative Christians that do believe all of that. And so I would get into fights with them a lot because, like, they insist that the Earth is only a few thousand years old, and I've held objects older than they believe the entire planet is in my very fucking hand. So it was always very frustrating. So I didn't really have the conflict within myself as far as that goes, but I did experience an external conflict over that.
And like, it's just like, I don't know. I feel like it's even something that like there's never a point at which like we as a culture have just sort of like accepted any of that. It's like a constant battle for like which sort of narrative is going to dominate. Because I think about like, I remember my dad being like so annoyed with me when my brothers and I and my dad were driving from Chicago to California, and we took like the kind of route that goes through, like the Badlands and stuff like that. And so we stopped at Mount Rushmore because we were like, well, we're never going to see it again. We might as well. We're here. And, my dad like really wanted us to kind of like take it in. And like, I was just very unimpressed. And my dad got so mad at me. he was like, how dare you not be impressed? I was like, what? I was like, it's so far away. Like it's a bunch of old dead presidents. Like, I'm just not, I'm not very taken with this. And I didn't even know at that point, like the colonial like symbology of Mount Rushmore, how we like literally took over a sacred monument and put our white presidents over the face of that monument, like as a deliberate form of erasure. And you have to keep trying to push that back into public consciousness because the whole point is to erase it. And even if it's the work that you and countless others are doing to just sort of dig out from the ground the proof that the kind of fairy tale that we tell ourselves about this country isn't true, or there's so much more that people are missing, I think is so important. And I wanted to sort of like focus on that for a second, because this is, after all, like the show where we talk to working people about their jobs as well as their lives. And you kind of already started giving us some of these great details, but I was just wondering if you could like kind of lift the hood a little more for those of us who have never worked in, for the Bureau of Land Management or the Forest Service. Like what goes into that kind of work? Like what does a week look like for you as a full-blown archaeologist, like working in the Forest Service or the BLM?
So archaeology work looks different depending on basically who you're working for. On the private side, it's very much driven by businesses just trying to check a box because the government requires them to do a survey to see if any kind of projects that they're going to build, like say a power line, is going to interact and damage any sites, and then and how they can avoid it or avoid damaging the site. And so they're much more fast paced because the business wants to get it done now. They don't even really want to do the archaeology part. They have to. So you're kind of limited in what you can do. But in the government side, it's the same basic concept, but we can be more careful about it and take our time and be meticulous. So what we do, whether it's for the BLM or the Forest Service, is if there's going to be any kind of project on whatever public land they manage, so it's BLM land or a national forest, like say they're going to build a new hiking trail, or there's going to be a timber sale or something like that, we have to go in first and survey the area to see if there are any sites or isolated artifacts that are in the affected area of the project, determine if it's going to be impacted, and if so, how they can mitigate the damage to that site or that artifact. And then they modify the project based on that information. So it's most of the time it looks like I get paid to go on a hike, because a lot of times it is just a formality. where it's an area where we know there isn't going to be any sites because of the landscape and the density of sites or artifacts in the area. And it's when you do this job for a while, you can almost look at an area and just know we're not going to find anything there, because humans are humans. Like almost every campsite that you go to, and like formal campsite for the Forest Service or BLM, is also an archaeology site, because the natives they camped there too for the same reason that you're camping there. It's a good campsite. So people have used the land and for the same kind of land, for the same kind of things, going back until time immemorial. So yeah, sometimes I just get paid to go on a nice hike, but other times we do find a site, and so then we catalog all of the artifacts. We mark off the boundaries of the site, and then we leave everything there, because our job is not to be Indiana Jones. We don't want to collect artifacts. We want to preserve every site and every artifact in situ, what we call it, where it has all of the data for the landscape and the soils and how it was used and what it was used for. It's all right there. So if anyone does want to use it for research, they can come and look at it, and nothing is disturbed. And also because it's if it's a native site, it doesn't belong to us. It's theirs. And so it's up to them what they want to do with it. And so we just need to identify it so it can be avoided. So that's usually what it looks like. And then we just go back and do a bunch of paperwork to record it and to make our recommendation as to how the project can be modified. The more stereotypical archaeology work that people think of, where you actually excavate and you remove artifacts, it's a very destructive process, is not actually something that's done by most archaeologists. That's 100% the academic side. Usually most of those are field schools. All the people doing the digging are students, and it's managed by a college professor. And that's where all of the academic archaeology stuff happens, which is still very useful, because that's what pushes the narrative forward. It analyzes the data, really analyzes the data and processes it and puts it out there for the rest of the archaeological community to debate and understand and realize new things, like the fact that the Clovis people weren't the first people on the continent, and people have been here for over 20,000 years. So yeah, basically who you work for can be very different.
So I will admit that there was a small part of me that wondered, like, it's like, is she gonna say that like she does like what Ron Swanson does at the end of Parks and Rec, when he gets like a job for the Park Service and he just gets to like ride a canoe around like national parks? And I was like, I mean, it sucks that show ended up just kind of leaning into its dog shit liberal politics, because I can't watch it anymore now, but I used to really love the show.
I actually know, I've not actually watched much of it. I think I've seen 1 or 2 episodes, but yeah, we joke about that sometimes, but in honesty, it isn't really, because even when we're just doing a nice hike, we're still doing our jobs. I get a crink in my neck sometimes because I'm just staring at the ground as I walk by, and you're walking in a very methodic pattern. You run these transects. Usually we're out there with 2 of us. We always want as many as possible, but it's usually 2. So we space out about 30 meters apart, and we're looking on about 15 meters on either side of ourselves, and we just go back and forth in a survey area, back and forth like that, until we've covered the entire area. So like there is work to it, but it's also you're also just hiking through the woods.
Yeah, no, I mean, Jesus, I mean, like, and I don't know, I guess like I have to ask, like, are you running into bears and shit out there while you're doing this?
Oh, absolutely. I actually, I should have died one time. It was actually my first season with the Forest Service up in 2019 in Helena. And we had just finished a survey, and we were going back to the car, but we walked back a different way than where we came in. And it was in a creek bottom. and there was a lot of brush and everything, but we had just left the survey area. So like this was all within, this spot was within earshot of where we were working. And we're not quiet at all. We're very loud. And as soon as I start walking that way, this giant grizzly bear jumps up out of the brush, and we both get scared shitless, and it goes running one way and I go running the other way.
Just like,
and,
like
I'm
both
very
of you
lucky.
screaming.
Like I don't know why it ran away from me. Usually when you spook them like that, they charge you. So I'm very, very lucky that it didn't behave the usual way.
Wow. Yeah, I don't know. You got very lucky there. But my God, I would shit my pants just straight up at that point.
I almost did. I was very spooked.
And so yeah,
I've also
I mean,
run
that's
into a bog pat the same way, or a similar way. It was walking a transect, and it was in those thin lodgepole pines, so you can't see very far because they're really thick. And neither of us knew the other was there because we were walking straight at each other, and we both rounded this little tree, and there we were. I was inches away from this bobcat, and it just jumped straight in the air about 10 feet, and I jumped backwards, and it was the same thing. We both just ran off in two different directions.
Oh, man. Yeah. Well, because bobcats normally, like, they jump at you from behind normally, don't they?
Yeah, they're ambush predators. I don't know if bobcats will hunt people, but cougars will.
Cougars.
I've never had an encounter with a cougar, thank God.
Yeah. Yeah, I think, dude, please don't press your luck with that. I feel like you've had enough run-ins for one lifetime.
Yep.
But yeah, you must have scared the shit out of that bobcat.
It had no clue I was there. I don't know how. It should have smelled me or heard me, but it didn't.
Wow. Yeah, I mean, but like you said, like, I mean, this is one of the things that I just like love about getting to do this show. I mean, like, because everyone has such interesting like work lives, and they obviously don't all look the same, but like, I don't know, like training yourself to have like that sharp of a vision where you're actually like seeing stuff that the 99.9% of us would just sort of gloss over or not look at all. You're doing it methodically. You kind of like following this pattern with your partner. You're also like kind of dealing with like working out in nature where there are things that can kill and eat you. I don't know, like that's a hell of a job in my opinion.
It's ruined me for like hiking recreationally though, because you can't turn that off. So like I actually just went on a hike yesterday with my roommate, and the whole time I was just staring at the ground, basically surveying. I didn't get to, like, look around and enjoy it too much. But yeah, you do develop really trained vision. I wouldn't say it's sharper, but you are able to recognize things. And it is kind of funny because I was the whole time I was walking along, and every now and again I did what I do on a survey where I bend over and I pick up a rock that while I'm standing looks kind of like it might be something, but then I look at it closer and it's nothing. And they're like, "What the fuck are you doing?" Because they keep picking up these little pebbles and looking at them. Like, "Oh, I'm working."
So don't worry about it. Yeah, I was gonna say, like, it's gotta be a joke among your friends. They're like, "Oh, that's just Kayla being Kayla." Like, yeah, like let her do her thing. Oh my God. And like, so I like, because like, I mean, like, obviously we're now having this conversation in the context of you losing that amazing job that you yourself are so amazing at, and that was so meaningful to you. And I hope that people realize, I mean, we've talked about from picking up, like a musket ball, like in Virginia when you were, a kid to now, like there is so much meaning in that. And I feel so deeply for you to have had that experience. And I feel so angry and pissed off and I don't know, heartbroken to know that we're talking at a time when you've been wrongfully fired from that job. And I want to talk about that because like I want to make sure that people who are listening to this understand kind of what is happening. why it is such an injustice, and what stake we all have in showing up for you, showing up for our fellow workers in general, and especially showing up for our fellow trans workers who are losing jobs like you lost your job due to fascist attacks. Like, I mean, it's not like you're like, you know, being negligent on the job and putting people in danger. No, like you're being attacked and become the focus of this fucking right wing outrage machine that wants to, like, you know, chop heads left and right. That's what it does. It is a bloodthirsty political machine that I think we all need to be doing everything we possibly can to fight against. So, like, we're going to get there in a second. But I think it's really, I mean, you tell me, like, I think it's really important for us to sort of walk through things sequentially, because a lot of the shit that, you know, the far right is able to do to sort of paint you as this, I don't know, you know, like radical trans militant G.I. Jane who's gonna, you know, like part of this larger cabal or whatever the fuck they're on. God knows, like they're high on their own hate at this point, and I don't even think they know, like they can see the logic of all of that. But like I think that a lot of the kind of the wackiness and the illogic of the campaign against you, like, depends on sort of blurring the timeline here, right?
Yes, it does very much.
So I was wondering if you could just sort of, like, I guess wherever you think like you would want to start. I mean, because like, I don't know, where do we start? Like, do we start with like how the anti-trans fervor has been building for years? I mean, Jesus, guys, if you're listening to this, we're going to include links to this. You've heard us talk about it before on the show. We're going to keep talking about it, but you can look at sites like translegislation.com. You can see how, you know, in 2015, there were like, I don't know, like 20 anti-trans bills that were like these bathroom bills. And now in 2023, there's like 400. Like it's like you've seen the segments on Fox News. You've seen, you know, the frothing like rage that is being whipped up left and right about trans people just trying to exist in the world, but somehow being painted as like the ultimate evil, who are responsible for all of society's ills and need to be eradicated in the most genocidal fashion. Like, I don't know, where do we start, Kayla? Like where we kind of walk our way up to the bullshit that you've been going through in the past month.
Yeah, it was a slow build basically, because due to all of that social pressure that paints us as this big enemy that conservatives need to fight against. The hatred directed at trans people has steadily been ramping up over the last few years. And so, like every other trans person with any kind of social media, not even just social media, because we get it in real life too. I've been getting death threats for quite a while through Twitter primarily, but also through my GoFundMe, because it allows people to send you email messages. And then there's also just, you know, the whole years of it. When I was still in Missoula, Montana, before moving down here, there was actually a man that tried to stone me, literally. I was walking my dogs and he like said, hello, whatever. And then I said hello back. And at that moment, he realized, oh, that's a trans woman. And he started just screaming all of these, I don't know, it was like religious shit or something. I didn't really catch what he was saying. And he started picking up these rocks from along the side of the road and throwing them at me. I mean, he was there. I guess stoning might be a bit of an overstatement, but it was still, you know, not fun to experience. And then it just continues. It keeps going like that. And so, yeah, I've been getting death threats through social media and everything. And then finally on March 4th at the CPAC conference, I don't remember his name. He's that conservative.
Knowles, that little fuckwad, Michael Knowles.
That might be it. He's the guy. He said that transgenderism, quote unquote, needs to be eradicated. You know, very unapologetically and clearly calling for our mass extermination. And so, with all of that other climate behind me, and continuing to experience it, and then it just got to me. And so the next day, I have an AR-15, because it's all a very long story. I'm not actually that much into guns anymore. I tried to be when I was younger, because I was deeply in the closet. And when I was very young, when I was a child, I was a very girly child, obviously. And my dad tried to man me up by getting me into firearms at a pretty early age. And so I was raised with that concept of equating manliness with firearms. And so when I was in the closet and trying to desperately keep anyone from realizing that I'm actually a woman, I got into firearms to try and cover all that up. And so I still had all those firearms. I still have this AR-15. So I picked this thing up, and I make a video where I demonstrate that it is an actual functioning firearm, because I knew that if I didn't, people would just say it's fake. And where I take out the magazine, I show that it has ammunition in it, I put it back in, and then I cycle through 3 rounds. And then I captioned it with, I don't remember the exact phrasing, but I think it was like, even though the advocating for trans people to just arm ourselves is not any kind of a solution to the genocide we're facing, if anyone does come after me, I will defend myself and take some of you with me. It was a dumb thing to post. I shouldn't have done it, but it was, when you're subjected to that much hatred, you're desperate to make it stop. And so I just did this stupid thing to, in a very vain attempt to try and make these people realize that I'm not a soft target, that if they did ever want to act on it, there's a strong chance that they might get hurt. Immediately it was picked up by conservatives, which was odd because my Twitter account was never very large. I had like 1,000 followers at the time, but they picked up on it, these huge conservative accounts, and immediately started painting me, claiming that I was threatening to go on a shooting. And that got circled. This was on March 5th, when that happened. And as soon as I saw them picking it up, I deleted the post. But it floated around because by then they'd screen captured the video, and they just kept passing it around for about a month. But it didn't really leave Twitter until the Nashville shooting. As soon as that happened, they immediately altered their narrative a little bit to claim that I posted it after the Nashville shooting in support of the shooter, and then also tied me into some kind of Trans Day of Vengeance demonstration, and painted that as if it was going to be like a riot or something. I'm not really entirely sure. And even claimed that I was leading some kind of effort to arm trans people, which is, the exact opposite of what I said in the caption, that's not really a goal of mine. And so basically painting me as this terrorist. And then the Daily Mail picked it up. And the first article was not just about me. It was mainly about the Trans Day of Vengeance, where they picked me and Alana McLaughlin, a trans woman MMA fighter, who has a similar picture that they've been passing around for a long time, and painted us as the leaders of this movement, and that we're going to go on some kind of shooting rampage or whatever. And then Alana was able to get them to take down her photo. I don't think they changed any of the wording of the article, so they still talk about her in the same defamatory way, but they left mine up, and then later published a second article that was exclusively about me, and was just continued all of that, reiterated all of those things, those lies, and continued to paint me as a terrorist. And then the Newsweek followed with another article saying the same things, then the New York Post, and then hundreds of other right-wing tabloids. And then, so that's when my boss picked up on it. And I don't know if he saw one or someone contacted him to let him know about it, but he called me and asked me about it. And I did not actually know about these articles until that point when he called me. So I was completely blindsided by this. And then, so they immediately put me on administrative leave. And this was towards the end of March, maybe the beginning of April. I don't remember. It was about 2 weeks ago. And then 2 weeks later, without any communication in the interim, they just fired me. And the termination letter they sent me on Friday cites those articles directly as their reasoning for firing me, despite I did contact my boss as soon as they put me on an administrative leave and sent him the screenshots showing that I did not post it after the Nashville shooting. I posted it a month before, and I didn't threaten anyone in it. They didn't really care. It didn't sound like in the termination letter that they believed me. They believed the articles, but then at the bottom they said, I don't remember the exact wording, but I have them up on my public Twitter account. The termination letter that they fired me because I posted an image of myself with a firearm, and how did they phrase it? It was something like threatened to use the firearm in a certain circumstance. You know, they tried to avoid admitting that I only threatened to use it in case of self-defense, because that's not a crime. Before they put right about the same time that they put me on administrative leave, I was contacted by the FBI and the Jefferson County Sheriff's Department, and not to investigate me, but to warn me of this doxing that was taking place, and to warn me of that there were people that were trying to find out where I was so they could harm me. And they directly worked with me. That I've been in constant communication with them since then. They actually tried to help me. They contacted my boss to let him know that I was not under investigation, that they were actually trying to protect me, that I didn't do anything wrong, but that didn't help. And now here I am.
Jesus, like, I don't even know where to fucking start with this, but I guess I'll start by just again saying how sorry I am that you've been going through all of this, because I can only imagine the toll that this has all taken on you. And I mean, I've seen it. I mean, I've seen, like, you know, shithead, you know, fascists and fascist enablers like Andy No out there, you know, putting out misinformation deliberately. I mean, doing what shitheads like Andy No and Michael Knowles do, Matt Walsh, all these people, right? I mean, they distort reality. They, you know, do whatever they need to do to stoke the maximal amount of hatred and anger, and, you know, like to use that as a political force for their own benefit and for the benefit of, you know, the sort of ideology that they want to see, you know, reflected back at them in the world. And, you know, so that there's so much gross stuff that's tied up in all of this. And I've seen, you know, I hope that anyone who has made it this far into listening, like, thank you for listening. And I hope that you can hear just in this one conversation, right, how different, you know, like the reality of this one case is compared to, you know, what you're seeing even in, I mean, whether it's the Daily Mail or whether it's, you know, like, you know, Fox News or Andy No's Twitter account, right? I mean, like, you have to sort of, you can't just let yourself be led by the nose by these hate mongers who have just such a kind of blind agenda that they're going to follow, and who they do not care how many people get hurt in the process. And so I hope, just first and foremost, to anyone listening to this, that you take this conversation to heart, and then you think about how this translates to everything else that we're seeing in this country. Even everyone who's saying like, oh, well, you know, we're I don't know, we're fine with trans people. We're just concerned about the kids. You know, you can excuse anything, even fascism, even genocide, if it's done in the name of quote unquote protecting the children. This is not new. This is what they have been doing, you know, to maintain or build kind of systems of power that privilege certain sectors of society as the more deserving members of society over others, right? I mean, this is what like they have done when, you know, slaves were freed, right? They were painted as like this like corrupting force, this violent other that was going to soil our bloodlines and destroy our families and our communities and our quote unquote Christians' ways of life. I don't fucking know, but like it's the same kind of trope that was used then. It was the same kind of trope that was used to otherize and paint in similarly like inhuman and threatening fashion Chinese immigrants, Latino immigrants. There were people who looked like me 100 years ago who were lynched in places like California for many of the same reasons, or like that's what the people who killed them said that they were doing. And you know, like it, and I mean, just Jesus Christ, that's what they did to the Jews during the fucking like Third Reich. I mean, like, I know people may roll their eyes at that and say like, oh, well, you know, that was way in the past, but it's like, nah, bro, if you fucking look at like, you know, how this works, it's playing out right in front of you.
And we've actually, us trans people have seen this before. This is not our first time dealing with this because we were among the first victims of the Holocaust. Way back immediately when the Nazis took power in Germany, their first thing that they did was to march in and destroy the Hirschfeld Library at the Institute of Sexology, which was the leading edge of research into trans medical care. That single act set back medical care for us and transition procedures by a century. Everything we have now was reinvented. They had it back then, and it was all destroyed. And then after that, they continued to persecute us just like they persecuted the Jews, and eventually shipped us to the concentration camps as well. With the people with the pink triangles weren't just gay men; they were trans women because they classified us as gay men. Because, you know, surprise, the Nazis didn't recognize the existence of trans women. I believe trans men were put in there under I think it was the black triangle, which is what they did to divergent women or something like that. But yeah, so we've seen this before.
And it's like, I don't know, like, I mean, I'm constantly trying to understand this, not, you know, because I think that people who are, because like when I mean, it's like war, like we were describing. Like there's another thing that I've heard, not just veterans like yourself, but also people like Chris had just kind of described to me, is that like, you know, war is that kind of unstoppable force that you see how it eats people and who they become in the midst of war, because there's no other way to be in war. Right. And I feel like that's what I'm watching. And I want to be very clear to people who listen to this show. You know, you listen to our past episodes. I do genuinely believe there are a lot of well-meaning, good working people out there who are just, you know, dipshits. I mean, maybe they can be sort of shaken out of prejudices. Maybe we can, like, we have to assume that like there are a lot of folks in our workplaces and our families who can be kind of brought to the light, who can at least learn to see that, like, as labor's enduring message, you know, tells us an injury to one is an injury to all. And just like the bosses use division within workplaces to pit workers against each other, they've done it with the same kind of categories we've talked about. They did it when women were entering the workforce, when Black people were entering the workforce, Latinos, undocumented migrants, right? I mean, they always try to find ways to pit workers against one another and see one another as the enemy, and so we don't actually focus our collective attention on the bosses who are exploiting all of us and pocketing the difference, yada, yada, yada. There are similar kind of dynamics at work here, right? And I just implore people to think about kind of how, and why you are being so berated daily by certain segments of society to believe that your neighbors, your fellow workers, your parishioners, the other people at your school board meetings, that they are your enemy, that they are the cause of all the kind of destruction that we're seeing and feeling, whether that be half a century of wage stagnation or corporate pillage and all the products we use just getting worse, right? Or inequality getting worse. Take your pick, like climate change, like fucking with everyone's sense of the existential sense of self and being in the world. Like there are a lot of things that seem wrong in the world, and there are a lot of culprits who are responsible for that. And there's also like a larger system that they benefit from that is responsible for that. So just ask yourself, what incentive may the people in those positions of power and the people who serve them and blah, 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 like, don't you think they may have like a vested interest in convincing you that your trans coworker is like the evil of society, and if you all just band together and pretend like you're Matt fucking Walsh, I hate this fucking guy. But I think the thing that he does that's very telling is, and I'm curious to hear what you think of this, Kayla, as not just a trans woman, but a veteran, because I feel like that's what Walsh is doing is he's trying to kind of tap into this sort of like nightly sense of purpose. And he knows that he's addressing, like a population that has many reasons for losing that sense of purpose because we're all playing in a rigged fucking system. Again, things are kind of getting worse for working class people. I'm not excusing everyone for their hatred and bigotry. Again, I'm thinking more of like the working people that I talk to who may just hear this shit on Fox News and may not think too critically about it. But I think that like there is this sort of like sense that that really like the problem with our society is just that we don't have a cause to fight for anymore. And like that this is like something that where people can sort of regain that lost manhood, that lost sense of purpose, that sort of that cause worth dying for. Because that's the language that they pit it in. It's just like, oh, I will die 1,000 deaths. I'll kill a million trans people like for this righteous cause. And it just feels so fucking forced. But I think the reason for that, at least in my opinion, as a cis, dude trying to make sense of all this, is just like, is he speaking to that sort of void? And I worry how attractive that is to people who have other reasons for feeling it. And I don't know, as a veteran, does that hit you like in the same way?
Oh yeah. Cause it's the exact same thing that they used to try and make us hate, the enemy and just Afghan people in general, because it's people recognize, like you've pointed out, that things are fucked up. Things are very wrong in so many ways, but they don't want the people in power, the ruling class, and then people who benefit from them, like Matt Walsh, they don't want the system that's causing those problems to change. So they have to direct that energy away from fixing the real problems into something else that won't hurt them and will allow them to direct all of that anger and rage in the populace towards a scapegoat. It's a classic fascist tactic. If they do it, it's a cornerstone of fascism. And that's why they target these minorities, because they are seen as disposable aspects of society. They're always small, they don't have as much political power because they're minorities. We have, as trans people, we have absolutely no representation in government. The highest representation we have are a handful of state level legislators. And when I say handful, I mean, like, I think there's maybe 5 in the entire country. We have nothing at the federal level at all. We have no political power, no voice. So we are a very convenient scapegoat because there's no one on a national stage that can speak out on our behalf, at least no one from our demographic. And so that allows them to direct all that rage at us and, in their mind, hopefully destroy us. And then that'll keep all the masses distracted and not lose anything significant in their minds.
And just like, I don't know, fuck those people. Like I'm sorry. Like, I mean, like I guess like to close the loop on the rambling kind of rant that I went on, like what I'm trying to say to people listening to this is like, I know that I preach and try to like show in the conversations we have for this show, we talk to conservative folks all the time, is that like we do have a lot more in common as working people than we have with people like Elon fucking Musk, with Jeff Bezos, with Clarence Thomas and the billionaires that, who support him and like corrupt our entire system, yada, yada, yada. So like that message still very much applies, but like I also want to be very clear, there are always going to be people we can't reach, and there are always going to be people, whether they are snitching to the boss and trying to undercut a union effort, or whether they are genuinely so bigoted, hateful, or for whatever reasons just like cannot unlock themselves from that hatred of trans people, like that they're too far gone. And so then the conversation changes. It's how do we build up, like, I don't know, a herd of buffalo, right? Again, labor's strength is in our numbers. How do we build a strong enough front to defend ourselves and our coworkers against those very real threats, to isolate the worst, most reactionary members of the working class, along with, like enough that they do not kind of cause real harm, and that they don't, like disrupt the movement that we're trying to build here. So like you have to draw lines in the fucking sand, I guess, is what I'm saying to people. And like, we are well past the point where all of us need to pick a side here. Again, I'm going to go back to all the great tropes of labor. Which side are you on? This is a which side are you on moment. There is no sideline here. If you are on the sideline, you are letting this fucking fascism brew and grow. And it's going to make it that much, it's going to cause that much more pain in the interim and death in the interim. And it's going to make it that much harder for us to fight when you finally get it through your fucking head that this shit is not going away. And like, I guess the other thing I wanted to address before I let you go, Kayla, and I'm so grateful to you for taking this much time to chat with me. I really am, especially with all the.
I have a lot of time on my hands.
Yeah, I guess you got time on your hands, but like, you also said something that really resonated with me, and I'm not drawing a false equivalence here, but I'm just saying, like, as a perpetually scary looking Latino guy, who has looked this way my whole life. But now I've kind of like leaned into it. I have a shaved head. I've got tattoos and piercings. So at some point I was just like, all right, fuck it. This is how the world sees me anyway. I'm just going to lean into it. But I like the way I look. But like, even so, you said something about like, you posted that TikTok and it was dumb. You shouldn't have done it. But I don't know. Like, I mean, when you are literally watching someone at CPAC, a spineless little shit like Michael Knowles, because then he tried to backtrack and he said like, oh, I never said we got to eliminate transgender people from society. We have to eliminate transgenderism from society. Right. Like that's
an ideology.
Yeah. It's like, well, what, like take it to its logical conclusion, fuckhead. Like, what do you, like you were calling for eugenics. You were calling for the elimination of a sector of people. Anyway, we won't go down that road, but like, I don't know, when you're watching that on TV, and you're seeing all the shit around you, you're seeing like from the legislative level to the level of media to the violent interactions that you can have with people at any given point on the street. I don't know. Like, I mean, like, what else are you supposed to do? Just like cower in fear? And that's what resonated with me, is because I remember apologizing a lot myself for proving stereotypes right, or I don't know, like for in my mind as a teenager, or, you know, even in my early 20s, like giving people reason to justify their fears of me, just by, I don't know, like, I mean, being a kid, being dumb, maybe wearing my pants too baggy, or like speaking too loud, you know, in public. And then I would feel like, oh, that's on me. That's my fault. I gotta really kind of rein it in. But like, that's the kind of like the condition that marginalized people of any sort of stripe are sort of put in.
That is true.
When you're in that, when you live in that society, right, where a certain segment is dominant, is like when your existence is second class at best or criminal at worst, like you are always already guilty until proven not even innocent. Like you're guilty until proven not a threat. And like that could be, you know, like black women not able to like raise their voice. Otherwise, they're immediately going to be like stereotyped, right? Or guys who look like me, you know, like, I don't know, you better button up your shirt and like do your best to try to like prove to society that you're not the scary Latino that everyone kind of thinks you are, right? And like, or, you know, like, or as a trans person, like, what is it? Like, just hide under a rock? Don't go out in public? Like, don't be yourself anywhere that anyone can see? Like, is that like really all that we have left? And like, I guess it doesn't do anything to really call out the hypocrisy of these people, because it's not about, because hypocrisy presumes that there's a sort of rationality that can be reached, and people could sort of come to the light when they see that their views are irrational. That's not what this is about. Fascism is a fundamentally irrational kind of system. Like that's what feeds it. So like you're not gonna kind of get people to renounce their fascism just by pointing out like the fallacy of their arguments or anything like that. But like, I don't know, like you do see how the power works, because you, as a trans woman living in a society that is telling you like we are coming for you. Yeah. You can't even post like a little TikTok like in self-defense in a country that claims that like guns in self-defense are totally fine. It reminded me of the Black Panthers in 1967, right? When they showed up. It
reminded me of that the entire time.
Yeah, so they show up with shotguns and magnums to the California State House, and suddenly Ronald Reagan and every fucking, you know, Second Amendment loving politician suddenly gets really interested in gun control. Yeah.
It's been very frustrating. No, you're right. Yeah, there's this pressure when you're a minority that you have to be perfect at all times, and you have to protest your oppression and marginalization in the right way. And what's even worse, when you step out of that and you don't do what they want you to do, and or do it the right way, is that the people who already hate you, like they already hate you. That's not what hits hard. What hits hard is that the people that you thought supported you, the people that you thought were on your side, all of a sudden turn against you because you didn't do it the right way. You're no longer that model minority that they want. And that's actually been, since this all started over the last 2 weeks, that's been the majority of the messages that I have gotten. Not even hate mail, not even death threats. It's been people telling me that they sympathize with me, that they understand why I did it, but I still deserved what I got because what I did was wrong. That it was I was not speaking out against what is being directed at me and other trans people in the right way. And that hits the hardest.
Jesus, I'm so sorry that's how people have responded to this. Because it's like, again, I want to shake people. And I'm sorry I've been yelling and screaming so much. I mean, I really hope it hasn't kind of like overtaken the conversation here. But like, I mean, because this is what I mean about the hypocrisy thing. Like, I mean, it's still important to see the hypocrisy and understand like what it tells us about the state of power in our society. I think that's the importance. It's not like you're going to convince the hypocrites like that they're being hypocrites and they should stop being hypocrites, but like the hypocrisy belies, you know, the inner workings of power in this country. And I guess for everyone listening, I'll explain what I mean. Is like you could have a situation like Kayla's, where again, you know, this is purportedly what, you know, the NRA is all about, right? This is what the Second Amendment's all about. Like you can have, you know, glasses wearing, mustachioed white dudes across this great land of ours with literal bumper stickers saying essentially the same fucking thing that Kayla said in her post, which is like, you know, if you want to take my guns, you know, you could try, but like I'm taking a few of you with me. I'm pretty sure I've seen bumper stickers with that exact phrasing on it, and it's so commonly accepted. It's so like, oh yeah, you know, that's fine. That's just guys being dudes. But like one trans woman posts it, and like suddenly it's bedlam, right? And like, you know, that again, you're not going to get anywhere by pointing out the hypocrisy of that, but you see kind of how that like power structure is at work where, trans people like do not have the same ability to even be angry or even have self-defense. So then what's the end point of that? If trans people can't even defend themselves by the same rules that other non-trans people in this country are purportedly allowed to defend themselves, then they have nothing. Then they are nothing but sitting fucking ducks for a murderous mob to roll them over, or to, again, their only permitted existence by the logic of these fascists is to exist underground. And that's it. And like, again, I just implore any cis person listening to this, any person who's just hoping that this will go away, that they are thinking that they don't know enough about it to have an opinion, just go with your gut. Like, just be in solidarity with other people trying to live their fucking lives. And I think that like, that's what, you know, like we're talking about here, and you're going to have to get on this off the sidelines. You're going to have to pick a side, and you're going to have to show up for one another. And I wanted to end on that note, Kayla, is just, again, I wanted to thank you for spending this much time talking with me. And it's been a real roller coaster, because I feel like we've gotten like some really fun, joyful parts and some really dark shit, but I'm just so grateful to you for chatting with me. But I want to end on that point of just, you know, what kind of final messages do you have for people listening to this? And also, very importantly, what can people who are listening to this do right now to support you, to stand in solidarity with you, and to stand in solidarity with our fellow trans siblings all across this country and beyond?
You know, I actually want to deviate slightly from what we've talked about, but it is still, it's still one of the most important ways that people can support us, and that is to just love your children. Because throughout all of this, everything that I have endured since I came out, and then especially over the last few weeks, is made much more difficult by the fact that I don't even have my parents to support me. And so I just want to tell any parent out there, if your child has not come out, and if they ever do, just love them and support them, and make sure that they know that you accept them. That is the crucial part. And if you already have, just hug your child a little bit harder tonight for the rest of us that don't have that. That's really all I wanted to say. That's the best way that you can support us, is to make sure that the next generation doesn't go through what we are going through. Make it end here with our generation, and no one else has to endure it. No one else has to grow up with what we have, and they have a joyful future. Give them that. Thank you.